Welcome, colleagues. Today, we're going to take a fresh, evidence-based look at a procedure we all do routinely, medial malleolar fracture fixation. We're going to put the implants we use every day under the microscope and really ask if our conventional choice still holds up against the latest evidence.
Now, the partially threaded cancellous screw, it's been the workhorse for fixing medial malleoli for a long time. But, it's a choice that also comes with a pretty well-documented list of potential problems.
Look, we all know that partially threaded screws work. They're effective for getting the fracture to heal, and that's not really up for debate. The real issue, and what we're going to focus on today, is the significant rate of implant-related complications, especially symptomatic hardware that can really sour an otherwise perfect surgical outcome.
And this number, this should really make us pause. This is the pooled reoperation rate for just implant removal after using partially threaded screws, and this comes from a recent meta-analysis. Think about that. More than 1 in every 7 patients needing a second trip to the OR. That's a number that really demands our attention.
And this isn't a new idea. This quote from the classic paper by Brown and colleagues really drives home the clinical burden. It quantifies what we all see in our clinics. That prominent hardware is a major source of patient dissatisfaction, and it all too often leads to a second surgery that might have been preventable.
Okay, so that really sets the stage for a crucial comparison. Let's pivot now to the clinical data and see how an alternative, the fully threaded screw, actually stacks up in a direct head-to-head matchup. The evidence we're about to dissect comes from a very robust, systematic review that was published in The Foot. What's great about this paper is that it brought together the best available comparative studies, giving us a really powerful, synthesized look at all the data in one place.
Now, this table, this is really the clinical heart of the argument. Just take a close look. The non-union rates, they're statistically pretty similar, and thankfully low for both. But the complication profile, well, that's a completely different story. The p-values for screw loosening, implant removal, and even the time to heal are all highly significant, and they all point in favor of the fully threaded screw.
And here's that point on implant stability shown visually. I mean, the difference is just stark. We're looking at a nearly 7-fold reduction in screw loosening with fully threaded screws. This isn't just a marginal improvement, it's a profoundly different behavior of the construct once it's in the patient.
And here's the crucial part. This is the payoff. That reduction in loosening translates directly into a huge win for the patient. A statistically significant drop in reoperations for hardware removal. In fact, in the group studied, it was completely eliminated with fully threaded screws. 0.
The clinical data is incredibly compelling, right? But as surgeons, we always want to understand the why behind the results. So let's dig into the biomechanics that explain why these clinical results are so much better. Okay, so the biomechanical studies really honed in on 3 key things that are absolutely critical for fracture fixation. First, the screw's initial purchase in the bone. Second, the stiffness of the entire construct. And third, its ultimate strength before it fails.
Let's start with purchase. This is fascinating. In cadaver testing done by Ricci and his colleagues, the fully threaded screws could handle 3 times more torque before stripping out, compared to the partially threaded screws. That is a massive difference in your initial fixation strength, right from the get-go.
And the advantages just keep stacking up. The fully threaded construct was way more resistant to gapping at the fracture site. It was over twice as stiff when loaded, and it showed elastic recoil, a property the partially threaded construct just didn't have. So the data from every angle consistently points to a stronger, more stable construct.
All right, so what's the big takeaway here? What happens when we merge these really compelling clinical outcomes with this incredibly robust biomechanical evidence?
Well, when you synthesize all the data, from the clinic and from the lab, the conclusion is pretty unambiguous. It really only points in one direction.
So the crucial point for our practice is this. We can get the same excellent healing rates that we expect and are accustomed to, but at the same time, we can drastically reduce patient morbidity from things like painful hardware and reoperations. We're not trading anything away. We're not sacrificing union to get these benefits.
Okay, so let's get to the most important part. How do we translate this mountain of evidence into real, actionable changes in our surgical technique and how we choose our implants?
The evidence really makes a strong case for a shift in our standard of care. This means we should critically reevaluate a routine use of PT screws. It means we should probably favor fully threaded screws. And maybe we should even take it one step further to maximally reduce implant prominence. Using headless versions of these screws seems like a logical, evidence-supported evolution of the technique.
At the end of the day, our choice of implant directly shapes the patient's entire postoperative journey. With fully threaded screws, we can offer them a path that has a much lower chance of the complications that lead to pain and ultimately more surgery.
And so, this leaves us with one final and maybe provocative thought. When we're faced with this compelling clinical and biomechanical evidence, we have to ask ourselves, what's the argument for not making a change? What's the real rationale for continuing with a technique that has been shown to be inferior? And that's a question for all of us to consider for our own practice and for the standard of care we provide our patients.